Despite the heavy rain, Tom paid it no mind and instead focused on driving to his important client. He increased the speed of the wipers to improve his visibility on the road. A question persisted in his mind. What have I accomplished in my life? He struggled to recall any happy memories at that moment, feeling weighed down by the exhaustion of working as a cab driver, coupled with the constant pressure from his irate manager. From the very beginning of his employment with the company, Tom's manager had never taken a liking to him. This was perhaps the reason why he had been assigned an old cab that sounded like it needed maintenance a long time ago. As he sat at a traffic light, Tom couldn't help but question his life choices. He thought to himself, what am I doing with my life? If only I had pursued a degree, I wouldn't be stuck sitting behind the wheel all day, having to be nice to everyone. As soon as the traffic light turned green, Tom stepped on the gas. He heard strange noises coming from under the hood of his car. It was clear that there was an issue with the engine, and he knew that he would be held responsible and forced to cover the expenses. Tom was filled with frustration at the thought of this. He knew he had limited options as a newcomer in the city with few connections. As Tom drove on, sad thoughts began to creep up on him. He couldn't shake off the memory of how the dispatcher always favored their own friends and gave them the best clients, leaving Tom with nothing but cheap rides. The unfairness of it all weighed heavily on him. After driving a few blocks, Tom decided to take a shortcut and turn into an alleyway. While navigating through the narrow path, a pregnant woman suddenly appeared in front of his car, blocking his way. She waved her hands frantically, causing Tom to slam on the brakes and shout in confusion and frustration, "What the heck are you doing? Are you out of your mind?" Tom jumped out of his car and continued to yell at the woman, scolding her for crossing the street in front of his vehicle. However, as the woman began to sob uncontrollably, Tom realized that he may have been too harsh with his words. He watched as the woman sat on the curb, still crying, and felt a pang of regret for his outburst. Tom realized that he had been too quick to judge her actions. He considered the possibility that she may have been in a hurry or experiencing contractions, which could have caused her to cross the street without thinking. He wanted to do something, but he was also concerned about arriving late to pick up his important client. In an attempt to make amends, Tom asked the woman to get into his car. "Please, get in. You'll get completely soaked out here. It doesn't look like the rain is going to stop anytime soon." As the pregnant woman got into the car, she looked at Tom with suspicion, giving him an unsettling, cold stare. Tom tried to break the ice by introducing himself. "I'm Tom, a cab driver." However, the woman's unexpected response caught him off guard. "I'm Natalie, ex-convict." Tom felt a shiver run down his spine as he heard the words. He couldn't believe that he was now transporting a former convict in his cab. Natalie noticed Tom's nervousness and tried to lighten the mood, telling him not to worry. "Relax, I said I was an ex-convict. There's nothing wrong with that, unless you think women can be criminals." Tom responded with a smile. "Thanks, Natalie. I really hope so too. It's been a tough ride lately." Natalie nodded sympathetically and then said, "You know, sometimes it's the tough rides that make us stronger. They shape us into who we are and lead us to where we need to be." Tom felt a sense of comfort and inspiration from Natalie's words. Maybe there was something more to this encounter than just a chance meeting on a rainy day. As he continued driving towards his important client, Tom felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. Despite the circumstances of his upbringing, Tom had become accustomed to handling things independently and was not overly concerned about his current situation. He had spent his entire life without the support of his parents and had grown up in an orphanage where he did not receive affection from caregivers or develop close relationships with peers. This upbringing had taught him to manage things alone and without the aid of friends or family. Tom was raised in a small-town orphanage and had no knowledge of life beyond its confines. He aspired to leave the place someday and seek a welcoming and affectionate environment. However, he was unsure where to go since he lacked information about his relatives, and even if he had any, they seemed indifferent to him. Tom was told that he was abandoned as a baby, so he didn't feel the need to search for any relatives. His longing for love was merely a childhood fantasy. He took advantage of the free driving school offered by the orphanage and obtained his driving license, knowing that it would be his main source of income. After leaving the small town, Tom relocated to a city in hopes of finding a job and settling there. Despite visiting various employment agencies, he was only able to secure a position as a cab driver with a conceited boss, Mr. Garcia. Tom didn't voice his discontent with the job, but he despised the idea of encountering his boss at work. One day, during working hours, the president of the company, who usually stayed away from the office and was often seen with his family, paid a visit. Tom admired how the president, Mr. Wilson, carried himself in public. Despite his high position, he was modest and respectable. The employees were discussing the purchase of oil for the cabs when Tom mentioned that he had knowledge about oils. This was because he was assigned a car with an oil leak and he had to frequently top up the oil, giving him insight into the matter. The president noticed it and smiled at Tom. "What's your name, son?" Mr. Wilson asked. "My name is Tom Higgins, sir. I'd like to have a word with you after the meeting. Come to my office." From then on, Tom and the president were often seen chatting and laughing, but this made the manager, Mr. Garcia, jealous and he sought revenge. However, Tom had done nothing wrong and was doing his job well, so there wasn't much the manager could do to punish him. Tom was sitting behind the wheel and driving his pregnant passenger, God knows where. He was anxious about the important client that was waiting for him. It was someone Mr. Garcia asked to make sure he picked up on time. Tom stopped thinking and decided to pass the time faster as he drove through the traffic. He turned to his passenger and said, "That's quite a baby bump." "Yeah, I'm expecting next month," she smiled. "I feel like I'll never see my babies," Tom sighed. "Why do you say so?" Natalie asked. "I've seen so much injustice that I just can't trust people anymore." They rode in silence for a while and Natalie spoke up. "Well, your whole life is ahead of you, and you just have to believe something. All it takes is a wish to change your life," she said and fell silent again. Tom felt a surge of nostalgia and a wave of emotions hit him. He couldn't pinpoint any specific memories that made him feel nostalgic, but it was something that arose after hearing Natalie's words. The idea of making a change in his life suddenly felt appealing to him after a long time. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had encouraged him to have faith and pursue his wishes. He felt a sense of positivity and grinned, catching Natalie's smile in the rearview mirror. "Thank you for your kind words," Tom said. Natalie smiled and offered to pay for the ride once they arrived at their destination. When she told Tom the address, he let out a deep sigh, realizing it was quite a distance. But he reassured her, saying, "Don't worry about paying. I'll take you where you need to go. I understand that you may not have the money to pay up front. I've had passengers before who said they would pay at the end of the ride, only to disappear without paying." Natalie nodded and replied, "Sure, I understand. And no worries, I didn't mean to snap at you. It's just that sometimes people judge me based on my past and it's frustrating." Tom nodded and apologized again for making assumptions. The rest of the ride was quiet, but the tension between them had dissipated. Tom quipped, "Looks like we're at a bank. I hope you're not here to rob it." He kept his promise and didn't charge her for the ride, taking into consideration that she recently got out of prison and probably had other expenses to cover. As soon as he merged onto the highway, Tom felt a sinking feeling in his stomach as he realized he would be late for the pickup now. He knew Mr. Garcia would be furious with him for being tardy, and he fretted that he might be reported to the president and subsequently fired. When he finally arrived to pick up a man in a suit, the passenger gave Tom a stern look and checked his watch before staring at him through the rearview mirror, but didn't say anything. Tom was certain that he would be reported for his lateness. When Tom arrived at the office in the evening, he found Mr. Garcia in a state of fury. "You were late for the pickup," Mr. Garcia shouted. "I apologize, Mr. Garcia. The traffic was terrible and my car was having some issues," Tom tried to explain. Mr. Garcia didn't want to cut to the chase. He wanted to indulge in his ego, and he took his time redoing his tie while looking at himself in the mirror. The silence was unbearable for Tom. "You know that the cab has a satellite tracker, right? I just love that piece of gadget. It makes my job a lot easier." "What are you talking about, Mr. Garcia?" Tom looked bewildered. He genuinely had no idea that there was a tracker in the cab. "I'm talking about the route you took. That was quite a detour." Mr. Garcia chuckled. "What did you do at the bank? Did you deposit the millions you're earning?" Mr. Garcia kept pushing. Tom was frightened. He was wondering if something bad happened at the bank, if he was really robbed or something. "Mr. Garcia, did anything bad happen?" Tom asked. "That's bad enough to punish you," Mr. Garcia replied. I'm just wondering how I can do that so that you remember it for a while. He smiled. Can I pay a fine instead? I promise it won't happen again, Tom pleaded. You have the guts to tell me what to do now, huh? Mr. Garcia frowned. You can get your stuff from the camp and get the heck out, he yelled out. Sir, I've always taken the cheap rides and never complained. I did my job well. Please don't kick me out now. I was just giving a ride to someone in need. She was pregnant. Tom started to explain, but Mr. Garcia cut him off. Enough of your fairy tales. I don't care what you did. You were doing your personal things and that doesn't fly in this company, he replied. This week's paycheck will go to cover the losses. Mr. Garcia finished and walked out. What losses, sir? Tom didn't get any answer. He didn't know what to do. He thought of what Natalie said about changing your life. This wasn't what he expected. He headed to the parking lot to retrieve his belongings from the cab, and while he was gathering his things, he spotted a flip phone lying on the backseat. Assuming one of his passengers had left it behind, he picked it up, planning to return it to its rightful owner when they contacted him. As he wandered through the windy streets feeling lost, he pondered what the future held for him. Without any other skills or connections, he was unsure where to begin looking for a new job. Standing at the bus stop, he felt a sense of loneliness amidst the bustling city. Eventually, he arrived home late at night, exhausted. After fixing himself a sandwich, he heard a knock at his door. Puzzled, as he wasn't expecting any visitors at that hour, he wondered who it could be. When he opened the door, he realized it was an old lady who lived next door. She was panting. Hi, I'm sorry for bothering you this late. Could you help me get my kitten from that tree over there? She asked, breathing heavily. Tom was amused at how many weird things were happening today. He quickly got dressed and went outside. He didn't ask any questions and went climbing up the tree right away. What's her name? Tom shouted from the tree. It's Amigo, Mrs. Bennett shouted back. He located the meowing kitten and cuddled it. Mrs. Bennett was looking up from the ground, beaming. God bless you, Tom. Thank you so much. She was really happy. Then she invited Tom to her apartment. I'm sorry for waking you up this late, and again, thank you so much. She kept thanking him profusely. You probably have to wake up early for work. It's all good, Mrs. Bennett. I wasn't sleeping. I actually got fired from work today and was about to have my dinner, Tom replied. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Hold on, I've got some stew for you. Mrs. Bennett went to the kitchen and started to put the food on the plate. Thank you, Mrs. Bennett. You don't really have to. Tom tried to talk her out, but he knew she was determined to feed him. Tom's smile persisted on his face as he realized he had never experienced such a pleasant conversation before. He was so caught up in the moment that he even forgot he had lost his job earlier that day. Mrs. Bennett bustled around the stove, preparing his dinner with evident joy. Once the plate of steaming stew was placed in front of him, Tom listened as Mrs. Bennett shared their story of losing her husband 3 months prior. Although the couple had never had children, they had been happily married for half a century. Mrs. Bennett became emotional as she reminisced about her late husband, confessing to Tom that she had been struggling to sleep at night and feeling incredibly lonely without him. Mrs. Bennett prayed to God to help her overcome her loneliness, and a few days ago, she found a kitten on her doorstep. She saw it as a sign and took it everywhere she went. However, this afternoon, while on a walk, the kitten, whom she named Amigo, jumped out of her arms and ran away. Mrs. Bennett spent the whole evening searching for Amigo, but returned home exhausted and unsure of what to do next. At night, when she couldn't sleep again, she heard meowing from outside. When she went out, she realized the kitten was up on the tree. That's when she knocked on Tom's door. She told him that she had seen him a couple of times and knew that he would probably be home. Tom explained he left home early and came back late. That was his routine. Alright, Mrs. Bennett, I better get going. Gotta get some sleep. I'm tired. Had a busy day. Tom sighed heavily and got up. Thank you so much for your kindness, Tom. Drop by sometimes. We're neighbors after all. Mrs. Bennett smiled. I will. As Tom went out and walked over to his apartment door, a cab pulled over to Mrs. Bennett's house. He opened his apartment door and went inside. It felt suspicious because Mrs. Bennett didn't mention she was expecting any guests, especially this late at night. He moved the curtain to see who's getting out of the cab. It was dark outside and he couldn't really see the face, but it was clear it was a woman. She slowly limped over to Mrs. Bennett's door and knocked. A moment later, Mrs. Bennett opened and embraced the visitor. Tom realized it was someone she knew and smiled and went back to his bed. He lay in his bed trying to fall asleep. Half an hour later, a phone rang, but it was weird because his ringtone was different. He got up and went out to the hallway. The ringing was coming from the pocket of his jacket. Tom completely forgot that he had brought the flip phone he had found in the backseat. The caller ID said Grandma. Tom hesitated before picking up, but then he decided to talk. Hello? Tom said. Hi, sir. I'm sorry for calling you this late at night. My granddaughter left her phone in your cab. Could you bring it to the address I will give you? We'll pay for the delivery, sir. An old lady said on the phone. Strangely, her voice sounded so familiar. Yeah, sure, I can do that, but I'm already home. Can I deliver the phone to you tomorrow? Tom asked. That's not a problem at all. Thank you, sir, he heard on the other end. Alright, let me grab a pen. As Tom listened to the old lady dictate the address, he realized it was actually not far from where he lived. But when she gave him the full address, he was shocked that it was actually next door to him. He hung up the phone and couldn't believe it. He laughed at first, but then it dawned on him. He quickly got dressed and walked outside. He ran to Mrs. Bennett's door and knocked. Natalie and Mrs. Bennett were having warm tea and conversing. Oh wow, that was pretty fast, Natalie noted when she heard the knock on the door. Grandma said that it must be someone else. The cab driver said he was coming tomorrow though, she said and headed for the door. When Mrs. Bennett saw Tom smiling at the door, she was surprised. Hey Tom, come on in. I thought it was the cab driver delivering Natalie's phone, she said. Tom didn't say anything. He just stood there barely holding his grin. As they walked to the living room, Mrs. Bennett shouted, Honey, I want you to meet Tom, the handsome man that I told you about. He got the Amigo from the tree for me not long ago. Tom and Natalie exchanged glances and smiled at each other. Mrs. Bennett appeared perplexed as she observed them. Is there a problem? Did I say something inappropriate? She asked, wearing a puzzled expression. Tom reached into his pocket and retrieved Natalie's phone. Here you go. Don't want you losing your things. Who knows, next time I might not be your driver, he quipped with a chuckle. As Tom spoke, Mrs. Bennett suddenly realized that the cab driver Natalie had mentioned earlier was actually Tom himself. She was taken aback by this revelation. Tom and Natalie both laughed and glanced over at Mrs. Bennett. Following their amusing discoveries, they all sat and conversed for another 2 hours, enveloped in a welcoming and amicable ambience. As Tom sat in Mrs. Bennett's snug abode, filled with family photos and impeccably organized surroundings, he was overcome by a newfound sense of warmth in his heart. It was an emotion unlike any he had ever experienced before. Tom gazed into Natalie's bright, sparkling eyes. She noticed his gaze and returned a smile. As he reflected on her words, he realized that the future held limitless possibilities for him, as long as he possessed a fervent passion for achieving his goals. During times of sadness and despondency, Tom turned to God for solace and comfort. Now he was grateful to have gained 2 new friends. Alright, you two, I'm feeling quite tired. I'm gonna hit the hay now. Good night, Mrs. Bennett announced with a yawn before making her way to her bedroom. Her brief message was the only thing she uttered before retiring for the night. Tom attempted to ease the tension by inquiring about Natalie's baby. She's quite active. Her kicks are really strong, Natalie replied, flashing a smile. However, Tom suddenly became lost in thought, pondering who the father of the baby might be. Uncertain if Natalie had a family or a significant other, Tom harbored a secret hope. Without warning, Natalie addressed Tom's thoughts directly. You're likely wondering about the father, huh? She remarked, meeting Tom's gaze. Tom remained silent, simply staring back at her. Natalie shared that her life story was quite fascinating. She revealed that she had dated a man who turned out to be a drug dealer, but she was unaware of it. One day, the police raided their place, and the man escaped and never returned. Despite her claims of innocence, she was convicted of drug dealing and sent to prison. However, she was released early due to new evidence. She was already pregnant with her ex-boyfriend's child by that time, but had never seen him again. When she got out of the prison, some people approached her with a check, claiming it was from her ex-boyfriend, and asked her to stay quiet and move on with her life. Is that why you had to go to the bank? Tom asked. Yep, she replied. No wonder you forgot your phone, Tom joked. I knew you would say that, but no. He didn't give me millions. I didn't really expect a lot either. You know, I was actually content with what I had in my belly. Natalie smiled and softly rubbed her belly. "Where are your parents?" Tom asked. "No idea. They left me at the orphanage when I was like 10 months old," she said. Tom was taken aback by this sudden revelation. He felt like there were too many unexpected developments for one day. He said he better go get some sleep and leave some room for revelations tomorrow. Tom woke up at noon to a knock on his door, where he found Mrs. Bennet bringing in some pancakes Natalie had made earlier. While they ate, Mrs. Bennet shared with Tom that Natalie used to live in the building's apartments and had no parents, so she was drawn to them. Tom's loneliness had disappeared entirely. He felt that God had blessed him with so many people in just one day. He wasn't upset about not having a job. Instead, he felt grateful for everything he had. Tom cared for Natalie until she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. When they were deciding on names, Tom suggested Destiny, and they all loved it. Tom did everything he could to help, from running errands to taking care of the household. He worked as a delivery man for a courier company, which was enough to get by. Tom didn't need much, as he was content just spending time with his dear neighbors. Tom and Natalie had been in a relationship for 6 months now, and their daughter Destiny was growing up quickly. Tom couldn't believe that he had gotten everything he had wished for. Eventually, he decided to propose to Natalie, and they got married. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration, but they drove up to the mountains with Mrs. Bennet accompanying them and had a lovely, intimate event. Several years had passed, and now Destiny was a little girl who could walk and play on her own. One day, Tom and Natalie were sitting on a bench discussing what to name their son, while Destiny played in the sandbox nearby. Suddenly, a man wearing a suit and sunglasses walked up to her, trying not to attract attention. "Hey there, little one. Can I play with you?" the man asked as he approached Destiny. She looked up at him and handed him a toy truck. Natalie and Tom remained cautious as the man played with Destiny in the sandbox without saying a word. They assumed he was just another parent at the park. However, the man eventually stood up and approached their bench, where he stopped and gazed at Natalie. "Can I help you?" Tom asked. "Tom, right? Nice to meet you." The man shook his hand. He then removed his sunglasses, and Natalie was surprised to see that it was her former boyfriend. "I know what you had to go through because of me," Cyril said. "Thank you for keeping the baby," he said, and asked Tom to step aside. "You did a great job. In the world I come from, that earns you respect. See, I'm not a perfect person. I'm not proud of the things I've done, but I've always been grateful for the blessings that come my way," Cyril said. After that, Cyril handed Tom an envelope and, without any further words, left. The envelope bore the message, "Wishing you all the best, thank you, and good luck." Tom hesitated for a moment before opening the envelope, only to find a check worth $100,000 inside. Tom returned to Natalie with the envelope and gave it to her, and she was in disbelief. She hadn't anticipated or desired this outcome, but now she was content with how things had turned out. Tom worked tirelessly as a delivery man for 5 years without ever complaining. His boss appreciated his work ethic and called him into his office one day to express his admiration. He said, "Tom, I've seen many people come and go, but you've been with us for nearly 5 years. I've never heard you ask for a raise or promotion." Tom smiled and replied, "Thank you, sir. I enjoy what I do here, and I'm grateful for what I'm earning." The boss took off his glasses and asked, "Tom, would you like to try management? I need hardworking people like you in the department." "I don't mind at all, sir. I will do my best." Tom was walking through the hallway, a big smile on his face. The next day he was sitting in his office when a man walked in. The man said he was sent from the hiring department and explained that he had recently been transferred from a different branch and was now one of the truck drivers. Tom looked at the man and asked to fill out the form. 5 minutes later, the man handed back the form. Tom read the last name and looked at the man. "Mr. Garcia? Is that you?" Tom was surprised. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Mr. Garcia asked. "I've worked under your supervision as a cab driver, remember?" Tom reminded him. When Mr. Garcia remembered who Tom was, he felt bad for what he had done before. He told Tom that the company's president, Mr. Wilson, had noticed that Mr. Garcia was firing many people just to impress him, and that's why he got fired too. "I'm really sorry, Tom. I was being a jerk, and I hope you're not still mad at me," Mr. Garcia said in an apologetic tone. "No, sir, not at all. I may have lost something, but I gained something bigger," Tom replied with a positive attitude. After the conversation, Mr. Garcia learned that Tom had been promoted to a higher position in the company and was now in charge of the department where Mr. Garcia was working. Initially, Mr. Garcia felt uneasy about the situation, considering his past behavior towards Tom. However, he decided to put his best foot forward and work hard to make things right. Tom, on the other hand, had no ill feelings towards Mr. Garcia and was willing to give him a chance to prove himself. He recognized that everyone makes mistakes and believed that people can change for the better. Tom was also impressed by Mr. Garcia's willingness to take responsibility for his actions and his sincere apology. Tom and Natalie were grateful to have Mrs. Bennet in their lives. Although she had never had children of her own, she doted on her grandchildren and treated Tom and Natalie as if they were her own children. The family was united in their love and support for each other.